One morning, I think 24 hours after I'd arrived at the ICU, the head of the ICU came to my bedside and said, "If we don't intubate you within the next hour, you're going to be dead." The doctors told my daughter and my husband that things were looking very grim and they hoped that all my affairs were in order. He jumped up from his seat and legged it across the ICU and called out Rabbi, and Rabbi Ellie stopped and he said, "My wife is in trouble, but she's Jewish and she would really appreciate it if this is her last day, that you could say some prayers."
Joining me today, we have Nikki Goldstein, joining all the way from Australia, who's going to be talking to us about a book that she wrote together with her rabbi, Rabbi Eli Schlanger, that is called Conversations with My Rabbi: Timeless Teachings for a Fractured World. And Rabbi Eli Schlanger, her rabbi, was murdered in the Bondi terror attack. Thank you so much for joining us, Nikki.
Thank you so much for having me, Hannah.
It's exciting. I know you had to wake up really early for this interview, but I'm sure it'll be worth it.
I'm actually an early riser, so no problem.
Okay. Okay, great. So, before you tell us about your book and why you wrote it and all that, which I'm sure is the question that everyone wants to hear, how did you meet Rabbi Eli? How were you connected with him?
So I don't remember the first time I met him. I was actually in a coma
Oh.
in St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. I'd had chronic lung disease for a long time, and hospital admissions were not unusual for me. And
Mm.
so every time I got a cold, I'd end up with pneumonia, I'd end up in the hospital. But this admission turned out to be very different. And I ended up in the ICU. And one morning, I think 24 hours after I'd arrived at the ICU, the head of the ICU came to my bedside and said, "If we don't intubate you within the next hour, you're going to be dead,"
Oh my
which
goodness. Wow.
really focuses the mind when a doctor tells you that.
Yeah.
So I had
What
enough time. Sorry,
what
go
were
on.
what were your thoughts when you got that message?
You don't really think. You more just process.
Mm.
I had enough time to send a couple of texts to my loved ones, to my mum and my daughter and my sister, and they were kind of a combination of "I love you" and "I hope I see you on the other side." And
Mm.
then they intubated me and everything went blank. Um, and during that period, things got worse and worse. And the doctors told my daughter and my husband that things were looking very grim and they hoped that all my affairs were in order.
Oh.
And it was, yeah, it was a big moment for them, especially. And while that was all going on, my daughter and husband kept a bedside vigil, and my daughter was kind of glued to my bed, and she looked up for a moment and she saw a very fast moving rabbi walking through the
Mm.
ICU, and she nudged her dad and said, "Hey, Dad, is that a rabbi? I'm a secular Jew, and my daughter hasn't been really brought up in a Jewish family, so she'd never really seen a rabbi. And my husband is not Jewish." But he jumped up from his seat and legged it across the ICU and called out Rabbi, and Rabbi Ellie stopped
Mm.
and he said, "My wife is in trouble, but she's Jewish and she would really appreciate it if this is her last day, that you could say some prayers." So
Wow.
yeah, it was a moment. And
Incredible moment, yes.
yeah, so it seemed we're talking about ordinary people living through all these extraordinary things. This was an extraordinary moment.
Moment. So what did Rabbi Eli Schlanger do?
So he came to my bedside and he said a couple of prayers, and then he reached into his jacket pocket and he said, "Would it be okay if I blew the shofar?" Which neither my husband or my daughter knew what a shofar was. Um, but he explained it's a ram's horn, and it's kind of, it acts like a spiritual defibrillator, and it resets the universe. So
I'm
he,
imagining that this was during the Hebrew month of Elul before Rosh Hashanah.
you're
Yes.
absolutely right.
Yes.
You're
Wow.
absolutely right. It was.
Okay. When we blow
And
the shofar daily. Yes.
yeah, so he had it with him.
Wow.
And um he he as that was all going on, a nurse walked by, and my husband said, "Is it okay to blow the shofar?" Like, they're in the middle of the ICU.
Right.
And this is an example of real kind of Aussie humor. She went, "Well, I don't think it will disturb anyone," as she looked across at all the comatose bodies in the ICU. So
Wow.
he blew the shofar, and then he went on his way. And uh, a couple of days later, well, actually, I'll backtrack a little bit. I didn't wake up immediately. It About 24 hours after that, my lungs started to improve, and the
Mm.
infection um, started to retreat, and that was very unusual. And they brought me out of a coma, and they said, "That is a miracle." I mean, they really
Wow.
thought that was the end for me. So the doctors first declared that it was a miracle.
Wow. The doctors themselves declared that. Did
Yeah.
you do you attribute your getting better to something that was going on in the spiritual worlds when he did that?
Oh, I absolutely do.
Yeah.
But before I even knew that Rabbi Eli had said prayers and blew the shofar, I think my first words to Rowan, my husband, were, I could feel the prayers. It was like a
Mm.
net holding me.
Hmm.
So I knew something had changed. And I mean, most people who have experienced a near death experience, reach for some sort of explanation for it. When the available science doesn't cover it,
Hmm.
you look for something mystical or something. At the time, I wouldn't have called it religious, but I would have said mystical.
Mystical.
And it definitely changed me. And I didn't know at the time that it would change the course of my life, but it has.
Wow. Well, before I ask you when did you actually meet Rabbi Eli, and when did you hear that this had actually happened? Because you were in a coma during this whole event.
That's right. So as I started to improve, and it took a couple of days, they sent me to a recovery ward. And I was sitting up on my bed one morning. And in fact, I was on the phone to one of my many doctors. And a rabbi stood at the door, looked incredibly surprised, threw his hands in the air, and said, "You survived." And he came to my bedside, and without being invited, he pulled up a chair and he said to me, "That is a miracle. I did not think you were going to survive." And he
Wow.
was astonished. He was really astonished. And within a couple of minutes of meeting me, he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a journalist, I'm an author." And he said, "Let's do a book together." And
Really? Wow.
just instantly. And I laughed and I said to him, "If I had $1 for every person at a dinner party who said they had a book in them, I'd be a millionaire by now." And he said, "No, I really mean it. I've always thought I would do a book."
Mm.
And that's how our relationship began.
Wow. So how did this near-death experience, how did it change you, and this whole intervention that with Rabbi Eli? Like, what changed inside of you after that?
I think it's a confluence of things. I think October 7th made me aware that I was a Jew in a way that I had never before. Um, I live in Sydney in a very non-Jewish area. My friends aren't Jewish. I hadn't thought of myself as Jewish first, and then
Mm.
October the 7th changed that. And then Rabbi Eli very deliberately stepped into my life. He was determined that we were going to do a book together. And he was also very gently inviting me towards the religion of my ancestors. And
Mm.
my daughter had this phrase for it. She'd say, "Oh, Mum, the random rabbis have shown up."
Wow,
Very,
the random rabbis, I love that.
a
Wow.
very Chabad thing, it turns out. They would show up uh, with matzah at Pesach, or he would show up at Sukkot and do a little ceremony on my deck. They would show up, and he certainly called me often. And Rabbi Eli was the chaplain for New South Wales prisons, as well as the chaplain for the hospital that I was in, where we met. And he would call me. He did a lot of traveling in the car, so he'd call me from the car, and we would very quickly talk about God and talk about what happened to me. And I was still trying to process that. I was looking for answers. And
Mhm.
as time went on, our conversations became more directed and more formal. And he really wanted to talk about how we might do a book together. And I came up with this idea of, let's just record what we're doing, what we're talking about. And I realized that certainly secular Jews like me, and I'd never met a rabbi before, don't get the opportunity to speak to a rabbi every day. So I
Mm.
thought, let's ask the unaskable. Let's talk about things that an everyday person might want to ask their rabbi. And then in late sort of December of 2024, he said to me, "I'm doing this project. It's called Project Noah. I want to bring the seven Noahide laws to a wider audience, especially a non-Jewish audience." And it instantly became obvious to me: seven laws, seven chapters. Let's structure the book around those chapters. So
That was
we
the journalist in you figuring that out, right?
thinking, the journalist in me
Right,
looking for an angle.
right,
So I that it became a very constructive way for us to structure the conversations and then talk around them.
right. Well, tell us a little about yourself. What like, where your background, your parents, tell us a little about who you are. Who is Nikki Goldstein, and what made her become what she has become?
So my parents were both born in Australia, so they're Australian Jews. But my mother's parents, who probably had the biggest effect on me, I had a very deep relationship with my grandmother. Um, they were not concentration camp survivors, but Holocaust refugees, and they came to Australia in 1939. And
Mhm,
my grandmother was a very determined woman and also a journalist. In fact,
mhm,
was a fashion journalist in Berlin before the
mhm,
war. And she was very plucky. And when she came to Australia, she got on a train, which in those days would have been a long journey and very rickety and a very bold thing to do. And she petitioned the minister in Australia. She showed up in Canberra and petitioned the minister for visas for some of her family, and she was able to save
wow, look
the
at
life,
that.
yeah, of
That is
probably.
plucky, that is courageous.
It really was, yeah. And she got visas and saved probably, a dozen or so of her family members, and
Incredible.
the
Wow.
rest didn't survive. But that
Mm,
story became, I think, very formative for me about, courage and, not seeing barriers. And I've certainly had lots of health challenges, and
mhm,
seeing health challenges as something to work with or overcome has
mhm,
definitely been a theme in my life.
mhm.
Um, and I think I can't avoid the fact that my grandmother was a fashion journalist and my first job was at Vogue. And
Oh, wow.
she loved
Ooh,
clothes, she loved fashion. I grew up loving clothes and fashion. So I think I very much, trod in her footsteps.
right, so that's your mother's mother,
That's right. Yeah.
and from your father's side was similar or
So Similar but different. My father was a lawyer, he became a judge, and he justice was very important to him, and
Mm.
rule of law, and I come from a family of lawyers. I was kind of the outlier. My
Mm.
brother and sister both became lawyers, so they followed in my father's footsteps. So law became something we talked about around the table, and politics. We were a very animated family, like many Jewish families. Everybody argues, everybody debates,
Of course.
and I think
Sure.
that two strong characters. My parents were both very strong people. They really informed who I became, and certainly as a journalist, the desire for truth and to get to the bottom of the story. Um, that was something that I learned across the table, and I definitely applied it in this book. And I think
Mm.
you know, the seventh law, which is to establish courts of justice, in light of what happened to Rabbi Eli, is
Right.
is very potent and very profound.
Absolutely, for sure. So it sounds like, you're trying to discover the meaning of this world through your journalism, through your questions with Ellie. Just like you get to the bottom of everything, it sounds like you were trying to almost uncover the fabric of creation in this book with him. Did you believe in God before then? Was belief in God part of your life? And how did he change your outlook on God and faith?
I believed in something. I think I would say I was always a seeker.
Mm.
And you're right. I'm somebody who really likes to get to the heart of things
Right.
and go deep. Um, so I had looked at yoga and Ayurveda and all of the different. I studied Jung for 3 years, so I was always searching for meaning. But I would not have said the word God. And
Mhm.
in fact, coming from the family that I came from, which was quite, well, very secular, and neither of my parents believe in God. So
Mm.
to say the word God would have almost been a bit cringy in my
Mhm.
family. We were
Mhm.
more sort of, I mean, my dad used to joke with me about, "Did you go anywhere nice last night?" Like, he was riffing on me, kind of meditating
Oh,
and
right. Yep.
joking
Yep.
about it, but God would not have been something we ever discussed, no. That came as a result of meeting Rabbi Eli and my near-death experience.
Wow, and how did your concept of God change through him, through your discussions and through your conversations?
Massively. I think it became the Jewish God of my ancestors that he connected
Mhm.
me to, and that was very beautiful and profound, and he did that not just by his words and not just by his conversations, but his goodliness, and
Mm.
I would interpret his goodliness as godliness, and
Mhm.
he was a wonderful exemplar of what it means to live completely immersed in God. And I think when you meet somebody who is so completely aligned with God, it's a profound meeting. And he had he had an amazing effect on me, but also many other people. He, I just think you don't meet people like that very often, and it exerted a very a beautiful invitation for me to look more deeply, and
Mm.
then the looking became engaging and became coming close to God myself.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, I'm picturing, like, a very secular home, a very secular person, and this very overtly religious rabbi coming to visit you. It's like such an unlikely relationship, and yet it continued for a long time. So something was pulling you in that direction. Something about him was definitely attracting you.
I It's possible that there was a seed in that in me always, and that the
Right.
near death experience watered it, and then
Mhm.
being in the light of his aura, his radiance, it kind of fostered the growth of that. And
Mm,
sorry to extend the metaphor, but it's the closest way that I can explain that he cultivated something in me that was maybe dormant,
mm.
and watching him and relating to him made something really grow inside me that I'm now so grateful for. Um,
That's beautiful. That's
I
really
think
beautiful.
perhaps directionless before, and now it's directional.
Right. Wow. When where were you when you heard the news about what happened in the terror attack, and how did that affect you?
So that on the 10th of December, which was 4 days before the massacre, we had our last interview, and he was telling me all about Hanukkah by the Sea, which was an event that he'd organized for 18 years as part of the Bondi Chabad, something he really loved. It was his territory of, being an out and proud Jew and bringing light and love to his community. And it was a very family day. There was a petting zoo there for little kids, and
Mm.
he had quite a large family himself. And so all the kids were out. It's Bondi Beach. It's so iconic. The sun was shining.
Imagine. So beautiful, yeah.
So beautiful. Um,
I was
and
actually in that Bondi Beach, and it's gorgeous there. It's so pretty.
it's so pretty, and it's a mecca for people from all over the world. It's iconic. People know about Bondi.
Mhm.
And, I'd said to him when in our last interview that he invited us, and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Ellie." And I'd been really trying to go to a lot of Chabad events because I wanted to come closer to him and to my religion. But I said, "Look, we're invited somewhere else," and it turned
Mm,
out, that probably that event saved our lives that day.
mm,
And at where we were was at a lunch that was organised by my ex-editor from, one of the newspapers that I worked for here in Sydney, and so it was a room full of writers and journalists, and,
mm,
at the end of the lunch, one of the journalists was saying to me, "What are you up to?" And she knew that I was working on a book, and I told her about this amazing book that I was doing with Rabbi Ellie, and she was like, "Wow, that's amazing, so interesting."
mm,
We had a very late afternoon, and Rowan and I came home, and just as we walked in the door, in fact, I was about to jump in the shower, um, she started texting, and she had one of the journalists who had previously worked for her was stuck in a restaurant in Bondi, and he texted her and said, "I hear gunshots." And she
mm,
jumped on the police wires, and it said at that stage, it was sort of early evening, 9 dead, helicopters en route, Jewish community attacked. At
wow,
that point, I screamed, like, it just came out of me, and I screamed to Rowan, "Ellie," and Rowan is very calm and a very kind of grounded person, and he said, "Don't jump to the worst conclusions. Ellie
mm,
will be fine."
mm,
But I really knew that he was gone, and I came downstairs, we sat in front of the television, and it was kind of wall to wall camera news reporting. Um, they had journalists on scene pretty quickly, and 9 soon turned to 15, and, um, that's how I found out that Ellie was murdered. And a friend of mine who is in the Jewish community in Melbourne, she was the first one to get a text, and she knew people who knew Chabad people. And as soon as we found out, Rowan and I just kind of collapsed into each other, and it was like an animal noise that came out of me. It was just the weight of the grief of that loss.
wow. How what a horrific. So your reaction to that, like, once you calmed down was what?
I didn't sleep much that night, and because, Katrina was a major journalist, somebody from the news desk had contacted her, and Katrina said, "Look, I've got a friend who knows Rabbi Ellie." And so very early the next morning, I had a journalist on the phone to me from my old newspaper, and she wanted to know about who he was. And it was meant to be a story about all the survivors. This journalist was kind of doing a ring around to find people who knew the human part of that story. Who were they?
Mm,
But it ended up being a whole piece about my relationship with Ellie. And from that moment on, I knew that I couldn't collapse into my own grief because I was the holder of his words and
mm,
knew what he wanted to say to the world. So, in a way, I'm not sure I've actually even really processed my grief.
mm,
I started writing the book in earnest and filling in the gaps on the 15th, literally a day after he died, because I felt filled with this mission to to convey what he wanted to convey to the world. And he prepared me for that mission, and I just had to take it on.
wow. Did you ever question, why did this happen to your rabbi, such a good man?
I was really angry at God for letting it happen to him. Um, but I think I you don't really know the truth of it, but the story that I've told myself is that, Ellie's a martyr. He died just as he was about to light the menorah. And when he was an amazingly courageous man. When he noticed that there was a gun pointed at him, he put his hands in the air and he tried to negotiate with the gunman.
Mm,
He wanted to protect his community. And
mm,
so he died doing what he knew to be the right thing to do. And also that beautiful optimism of his, that he believed that he could do good, that he could change this man. Ellie believed that about everybody. He believed the goodness in everybody. And so I think what I took from that is that his loss is great, particularly for his family and his
mm,
community. But his loss is a clarion call to the rest of the world to wake up, to
mm.
be the best person that you can be. That's how he lived. That's how he died. And so I think, in a way, my grief has transmuted into my mission.
That's beautiful that it pulls you and it pushes you forward. It really propels you to do something about it and that you're using your grief in such a positive way. And it's interesting because in today's times, in today's climate of such strong anti-Semitism all over, you are standing up against that by writing this book in a way. You're bringing that as a target on yourself. How do you feel about that? Like, do you feel that Jews should be just hiding, or do you feel that we need to take more of a stand like you are?
Ellie and I talked a lot about anti-Semitism, and he every time I brought it up, and I was scared for him. I had maybe a sense that all Jews, we know that we're all in danger
Mhm,
on some level. I didn't realize how in danger he was. But I think every time I said that to him, he said, "We don't cower. We don't
mhm,
shelter. The more they hate us, the more Jewish we become."
mhm.
And I am scared. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't, but I have to take his courage and use that as a kind of shield, because who would I be if I wasn't prepared to stand up?
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's a scary world. It definitely is.
And I find it so beautiful that the women who, in your own words, you didn't, God wasn't a reality in your life. You wouldn't say the word God, and yet you're taking the message of bringing God to the world, and you're doing that by bringing it and publicizing God to the world, really, through your book.
Yeah, it's. it probably wouldn't have happened if those two massive things in my life hadn't happened.
Mhm.
You know, Ellie's intervention, and I really believe this in with every part of me, Ellie's intervention to God gave me a second chance at life, and I have to do something with that. And then he coached me, he brought me into the tent, he invited me in, and I'd be a pretty poor person if I was running out of the tent because I'm afraid. And people are afraid every day, and you just have to crack on, and that's what I'm going to do.
Wow. Was there any particular, I mean, you're calling it conversations with your rabbi. Was there any particular conversation that you remember that really had a tremendous impact on you?
Maybe the first conversation we ever had, which was about, essentially it's the Noahide law about believing in one God, but it's couched in don't don't bow down to false idols. And I always envisaged that meant, kind of the Hollywood movie, Russell Crowe version of that, which is, you know, God on high speaks to you from a throne. And I think that was one of the reasons that I kind of rebelled against Judaism, was thinking this is a very patriarchal, very imposed God.
Mm,
And it wasn't until I realized, and, that's through my conversations with Ellie, and then later another rabbi who stepped in to help me with the book, Rabbi Schmotkin, who invited me to see that it's not a patriarchal God, it's not an imposed God, it's an invitation to a very deep personal relationship. And that relationship has changed my life. And
mm,
I think clearing that misunderstanding, which is a barrier to God, um, now I have my own relationship with God that isn't being talked about outside, it's experienced inside.
mhm.
And
And
that's
what's that
changed.
relationship like? Tell us about that.
Well, it's given me a lot of comfort since
Mhm,
Ellie's death, and it's given me something very joyous. I
mhm,
think if I could hold a tincture of the joy that he experienced, with God, then I'm on the right path. But I would say now it's very personal.
mhm,
It's mystical for me. It's hard to it's not containable. It's not frameable. Um, it's something very sweet. It's a
mhm.
sweet invitation is how I would describe it, and it's now very present with me. It's kind of a presence that I'm connected with every day.
That's beautiful. It's ironic that the strength of that presence happened through such a tragedy, and even your own personal tragedy of, you're lying in a coma, and then the October 7th, and also the massacre in Bondi. These all seem to have strengthened it, which is so interesting to see.
Well, Ellie said to me, one of the questions I had in when we were talking about the book is I said, "How do people come to God?" And he said, "Well, there are usually two ways, either through joy or through pain."
Mhm.
And I guess pain was my gateway,
Right.
and, um, but it's transformed since then. You know, I think since I opened the door, the
Mhm.
pain has been, transmuted into something much more beautiful, much more profound. Pain is transient,
Mhm.
and I think what I'm experiencing now is something more, I don't wanna sound too grandiose, but more eternal.
Mhm.
It's something that is not impermanent. It's deeper, and it's more of a grounding for me.
Mm. It sounds like it's grounding, but at the same time elevating you, really really elevating you to a higher enabling you even to overcome your grief and to just focus on this mission that you feel you've been given.
Yeah, it's been an extraordinary transformation and in a pretty short time in a way, because we're talking 2022 is when I was nearly died, and, we're only in 2026, but
Mhm.
I think that longing had always been there, and
Mhm.
it's a bit like longing for a partner. You really hope that you meet the right one,
Right.
and, Ellie facilitated that, and my second chance at life facilitated that.
What
Um,
what what do you think would be his message now to people?
it would be pretty simple. Once he asked me, and this is right at the front of the book, he said, no, I asked him. I said, "Ellie, what's your mission?" And he said, "To bring light." And he kind of laughed with it, and then he said to me, "What's yours?" And I said, "To bring love." And he went, "Perfect balance, male, light, female, love, perfect." And he kind of spoke like that. He was really more a teacher of deeds than words, and
Mhm.
the fact that I was able to, like, his daughter said recently on a Instagram post, "I've got ADHD and my dad had ADHD." And that makes sense because he was kind of a human army. He was in 20 different places at once doing all kinds of good, and he was always on the move. So he spoke in a very active, very fast way, and I think what he would want to leave the world with is that we need to be united, we need to be loving towards each other, and if the book can bring hope to people, especially Jews, in this time of crisis, an anti-Semitic global emergency, if it can bring some hope, then even one person, that we will have done our job.
Hmm. So ironic again, you say he's a man of deed, and yet you're taking his words and bringing it to the world, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little about the book. Like, what is your goal? What is the book really about? I know it's conversations that you had with him. Is there and I know that there's this theme of the 7 Noahide laws. Is there a message that like an overarching message that you want to give with it?
I the message is that everybody can live better, can live well by following a guiding principle. And even if you only took one of the Noahide laws, as I have, there's really one that's guiding me. It would make a change in your life. And
Which is the one that's guiding you?
well, I think that the don't worship false idols, and
Oh, awesome.
that's true for all of us. Our false idols are money and fame and power and TikTok.
Totally.
We're worshiping at all the wrong idols, and even if that message came across, which is you can go deeper than that, that there's something beckoning you beyond the visible, the visceral, the corporeal, something beyond our TikTok world and our
Mhm.
busyness and our schedules, then look for that, engage with that, invite that in. And I guess that would be my message, that, you know, our world doesn't offer all the answers. There is something beyond that. And these ancient laws, these ancient frameworks offer something beautiful and something timeless in a fractured world at a time when we're all struggling, Jew or non-Jew, everybody's struggling.
Mm. There was a beautiful quote in the very beginning of the book. If you don't mind, I'm gonna quote it right now. That was from the Rebbe, and it says, "As soon as you awaken to the purpose for which God sent you, this fractured, dreary world shifts, and its fragments merge into unison, synchronized, miraculous, as it was meant to be." From the Rebbe. What does that mean to you? Tell us about that.
That encapsulates everything in the book, that you can see miracles everywhere if you choose to, and that the world is a miracle, that life is a miracle, that my survival was definitely a miracle. I think that what the Rebbe is saying is that the dream disappears when you see the reality of what's beyond that,
Mhm.
and you connect with the divine, you connect with God. And I mean, that's definitely what Ellie would have wanted people to take away. He he wouldn't have been squeamish about saying, "We owe everything to God. We are God in our incarnation." And I think that's what Ellie would have wanted people to take away. But
Hmm.
that quote, I mean, in a way, you don't really need to read the rest of the book. It's all in that quote.
That quote, right? Wow. Well,
And
you
then
said yeah, go
Right,
ahead.
and then I'd take another 200 pages to explain it.
Right. Wow. It's interesting because you said before there was something in you, like a part of you that was just dormant or that was just asleep, but it was still seeking, and just Ellie was able to awaken it. Do you think it was your Jewish soul that was like just pulling you, that part of God that's within you?
100%. Yeah. I think, who knows how long I've got left on this earth, but it was to awaken at that time to my Jewish soul, to
Mhm.
connect with it. And it happened coincidentally at a time when the world really needs this message
Mhm.
and needs Ellie's wisdom. And I hope that the reader is me. They're the questioner who is
Mhm.
seeking answers to these eternal questions. What does life mean? What does God mean? What does marriage mean? What does it mean to live in a just society? What do we need to do to contribute to that? And
Mhm.
this is something that is not passive, it's active, it's a choice, it's something that needs to be very intentional. And I don't think any Jew today can be passive and on the sidelines. Ellie's way of expressing that was to be an out and proud Jew. My way of expressing that is to write and connect with people and try and awaken their soul,
Mhm.
whether it be via a Jewish vessel or a non-Jewish vessel. And the Noahide laws are very specifically non-Jewish, but
Mhm.
but the next part of my life is definitely for me to personally explore what it means to be in relationship with God, but also to help others, to connect
Mhm.
others to that experience. And plenty of secular Jews out there who are feeling the way that I felt.
Mhm.
There was kind of a seed that only needs to be awakened.
Mhm. And who did you when you're writing it, do you have, like, a particular person in mind, or are you who are you writing it for?
I think I'm writing it for me. I'm writing it for all the secular Jews who have questions and didn't have answers. And, the book answers it for me. And I was because I'm a journalist, I was also writing contemporaneously. I'm writing about my feelings of going to Ellie's funeral and my feelings about the politics of the moment and my feelings about, what the government was and wasn't doing.
Mhm.
It was very important to the Jewish community that the Australian government launch a full investigation into what happened, and that's in process now. In fact, this very week has seen the first tranche of eyewitness testimony and anti-Semitism testimony, and it's been really powerful, very important for the Jewish community and the world to hear that.
Mhm.
I think the timing is very divinely orchestrated,
Mhm.
for the book
Mhm.
and for Ellie's part in all of this. He's part of a big puzzle that, is only becoming obvious now.
Mhm. It strikes me like you thought even before this whole thing happened, the whole terror attack happened, the massacre happened, you still and you mentioned that your ex-editor still thought it would be a very interesting book, these conversations with a rabbi. I mean, now all the more so, because the world knows what happened to Ellie, to Rabbi Schlanger, but what made you think that people would be so interested even before?
I'm not sure that I did think that before. Like,
Okay.
Ellie would say to me, "This book has gotta go global," and I
Wow.
would say to him and at that stage, I was going to self-publish it. I didn't have the phenomenal Lisa Sharkey and my amazing, um, Australian and UK publishers on board. I was just gonna publish it myself, and he would say, "The book's gonna go global," and I'd say, "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It'll probably sell like 100 copies to your Chabad." So
Right.
I think I was right. It was pester power. Like Ellie was really determined that we did it, and I didn't have as big a vision for the book then that he had. It's like he had a sort of sixth sense about what would happen with the book, but he knew in his absolute being that it would be read by a lot of people. He had to
Wow.
drag me along. So yeah.
Is that it was almost like this premonition. He knew that this was part of his mission in life and what he needed to do. Wow.
He absolutely did, Hannah. I mean, there's no ifs and buts about that. He knew. He
Mm.
absolutely knew.
And when you mentioned before your thoughts about the funeral that you have that in there. When you were at the funeral, did you know already that you were writing this book?
Yes. Yeah,
You did.
I
So
did.
what was going through your mind during the funeral?
I mean, terrible grief. That room was hard to be in. There
I'm
were
sure.
so many people, and I think I was really just feeling for his family that day, and, his father-in-law, Rabbi Ullman, who stepped in to write the final chapter with me on
Mm.
establishing courts of justice, which he did only 2 weeks after the massacre. So it took
Wow.
enormous courage and presence of mind for him to sit with me and do that. But I think on the day of the funeral, I was really conscious of his absence in he was such a big personality, and it felt like there had been a rent in the universe that he wasn't there, and just to feel the grief of so many people, and I'd never been to a funeral like it.
Mm.
He I mean, my dad had had a big impact in the world too, but my dad died of natural causes at a much later stage in life. This was
Mhm.
brutal, violent murder, along with a lot of other people and a 10-year-old girl, and a Holocaust survivor. So that room was just the the it was just a fog of grief. I've never experienced anything like it.
Mhm. Wow. Wow, incredible. When you look back at your life and you look at where you are now, do you have any thoughts about how far you've become, how much you've changed, and where you might get to in the future?
I really hope I can continue to do this work. Um, I think that's my gift is to be able to take really esoteric and complicated principles and make them easy to understand and relatable. And especially if I can reach the secular Jewish audience, who have that seed in them and that searching and that longing for something more.
Mhm.
That's really who I want to reach. And I think, I'm 60 and I'm very lucky to be here. I got another go at it, and
Mhm.
I wanna do something really meaningful with that, and it's it's for the Jewish world now. The Jewish world is in crisis and in pain, and if I can do anything with the skills that I've been given, then that's what I wanna do.
Beautiful, really beautiful. Well, I wish you tremendous success in your book and your launching of the book, and it should go wide and far and wide to influence the people that you have in mind, and even more than what you have in mind, and to be a legacy for Rabbi Eli for the great work that he's done and the amazing conversations that the two of you have had.
It was such a blessing, and I'm so grateful for your thoughts and for helping me to spread the word. Really, Hannah, I'm very grateful.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. Is there any last parting words you want to say to the people who are listening to this?
Well, you're talking to a Chabad audience, and Ellie was such a proud emissary of Chabad. And, I would really encourage the Chabad audience to have this book in their home and to use it as a teaching tool for their friends, their family. That's what Ellie would have wanted.
Mm,
He believed in the Chabad mission with every part of him, and it was Chabad that allowed him to stand up in the last seconds of his life and try to protect his community. And I think if we can celebrate his sacrifice by reading his words and taking in what he was trying to do, then I think we've really done it. We've done a service for his life and his sacrifice.
right. Wow. Well, thank you again, Nikki Goldstein, for joining us, and tremendous success in this book and all your future works. We're looking out for even more books to come from you about even greater stuff. Thank you
Thank
so much. Wow, that was something. What a story from Nikki Goldstein. Sometimes you're just so confronted. It's right in front of you, the divine providence, the hand of God leading things and bringing things together. I found it so incredible with Nikki's situation, her medical situation, how she met Rabbi Eli the first time, how actually her husband and her daughter called Rabbi Eli over, and how she developed into this relationship with him due to that near death experience, due to her medical situation, and how that bloomed and fostered and developed so deeply. I loved how she said that there was something in her. There was this seed that was in her, but it needed to be planted. And Rabbi Eli did that. And of course, that's the Jewish soul seeking, waiting, just waiting to be fed and waiting to be watered and nourished and to grow from it. And the horrific events of the Bondi massacre is what actually propelled her book to come out in the way that it's coming out, and the teachings of Rabbi Eli to be told and to give him the legacy, to bring out his words and his teachings from all those years that she had previously met him, and to come to the world. And I just found the whole story so amazing, and how things just developed, and how something that was so full of grief and so full of horrific sorrow. And she describes that, how she was just so immersed in this terrible grief right after she heard about his passing, but how that also propelled her forward and propelled her to do something positive with it. And I guess the story is true in our own lives. God is leading us, God's hand is there, and God is propelling us in the difficult times and the sad times and the hard times and the struggles, but somehow, somewhere, it is propelling each and every one of us to our mission in life and to what we are all here for. And if we could somehow see that hand, as you can so clearly see that in this story, our lives are definitely become elevated. If you enjoy watching these videos, I hope you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary. We are on all podcast platforms. You can watch us on YouTube. You can watch us on the go. Give us some feedback. We love to hear from you. Drop a comment. Tell us what you liked about this. I wonder what message you got from Nikki and from her newly released book, and how you take that message into your own personal life, as she has clearly taken it into her own life. Thank you so much for watching and for being a part of this extraordinary community.